Hey everybody, let's talk about wildcard party dynamics. So this is a big one in terms of it being a lot to talk about. Let's get started. Modern RPGs have one wildcard character, that would be the main character, and then the rest of the party is scripted characters. So you've got, Garrus, and then you've got Liara, and then you've got Tali, and then you've got Rex. And you have these characters because you have a very specific plot line, and these characters were built to move that plot line along in an effective way. The devs decided that these were the best characters for the job, and they write the entire plot line with them in mind. They push it along, they move it back and forth, they tell you what to think. This is an extremely effective way to write a linear plot, but as everybody knows, as it goes non-linear, these characters fall silent because their entire existence is bound to the plot. They can't have character growth beats when you're wandering around a moon somewhere, because you might not wander around a moon somewhere. Their existence has to be tied to the plot and only to the plot. So if you're not on the plot, then they're just taking up space and occasionally making a snarky remark. Well, there are other options, especially for non-linear games, and I figured we should cover one of them today. That would be wildcard parties. This is when the player makes 4 PCs, designs them from the ground up, or maybe 3 or maybe 5, however many the game requires. This is something that's become unpopular these days, but the reason it's become unpopular is because everybody writes like this, and it's not the same kind of situation. So you can't use your wildcard party in the same way you would use a scripted party. It's just not going to work out because they have completely different objectives and different investment levels. But if you understand the party's dynamics, you can use a wildcard party extremely effectively. So let's talk about that. The biggest difference that you have to understand is that the player has just made 4 PCs. PCs are high investment characters that have a high level of connection to other PCs and almost no connection to the game world. Even if the player makes an Asari in their party, it's not going to be Liara. Their Asari might not be someone who can be involved in the ancient backstories. Maybe they made an Asari that's like that bartender or a warrior, who knows. So you can't just assign their Asari to the backstory that Liara would have told. You can't use it like that. You can't connect them to the world because you have no idea how the player thinks about them. But you can connect them to the other characters in the party, because the player makes it very clear what their relationships are. So what I'm getting at here is, in this approach, all of these characters are available to talk plot. You can put in 10 major NPCs. The player hangs around with 2 of them most of the time in their party, but they appreciate the other ones, and when they show up to do plot-related stuff, the player accepts those NPC plot beats because they accept the NPCs as important party members. That's not going to happen in a game where the player makes these, because there are no important major NPCs. If there were, they would be in the party. Once we accept that the party is more important in terms of how it relates to itself than how it relates to the world, we can really go to town on how the party dynamics should work. What we need to do is think of this as a family in The Sims. So when we build our party, when the player builds their own party, they are building a family in The Sims. The Sims family doesn't care whether the mayor is trying to, steal fishery rights or whatever. That kind of politics just doesn't matter because it's completely unconnected to the family. But they do care if one of their family members stubs their toe. Once we understand this, we can start to write our entire setup around that concept. So let's go do an example here. You're writing Mass Effect 9000, and the Asari have crashed their ship, and so there's an Asari captain standing outside, and she's pretty glum. She's like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe I crashed my ship. My boss is gonna kill me." And then you rock up and you're like, "Hey, human McHuman face here. You need any help? I'm sure I can help you because I have this huge gun. And then I have this other huge gun and another huge gun. I'm wearing power armor. Also, I have a Krogan wearing power armor and carrying huge guns. And we came in a tank with huge guns. Oh, and there's a stealth ship that you can't see floating overhead. And the Asari is like, gonna go with no. No, I think I'd be safer if I try and muddle through on my own. What happens next with the writing? Well, in a linear story, what happens next is Liara shows up, and she's like, hey, he's with me, don't worry, we're the good guys. And then the game goes on, and, linear story just progresses. If you're making your own characters, if the player is building their own party members, how does this work? Do you check if they've got an Asari on their team? Do you check if the Asari is in good standing with other Asari? If they have an Asari in good standing, you go one way. If they've got an Asari in bad standing, you go another way. If there's no Asari, you go a third way. You're making 3 times as much content, at least twice as much content. What a huge amount of burden you are giving yourself. Or you could simplify it and be like, oh, if you don't have an Asari, you have to prove yourself by killing some Geth. In which case, you've just told the player that their critical decision when they were making characters, they agonized over it, and they chose not to. They said, fine, I'm not going to have an Asari. I'm going to have one of those bird people instead. And you say, well, okay, in that case, you have to do this tiny little side quest. That's the only difference. So either you have to make a ton of extra content, or you tell the player that their choice didn't matter. Those are both losing propositions. So what we do instead is we write a linear story. Yeah, it's not like the entire game has to be linear or anything, but the beats within this area are going to be the same regardless of who you brought with you. So, you got your human McHuman face in the party. Here they are. I'm human McHuman face. Grr. And then you've got your Asari in the party. And who knows, maybe she's a shrinking violet, or maybe she's a badass warrior, or who knows, right? Yeah, I don't know. You've got Tali here too, because everybody's got Tali in their party, right? These characters don't define what happens in the story. They can't, because the player can't create them to have connections to the story. I mean, you can wrangle it with certain kinds of tricks and tips. You can really, really finagle it. But just in general, the player's choices shouldn't drive the way the story unfolds, because if it does, you're going to have to write a million ways that the story unfolds. So yeah, if they've got an Asari, then they get a couple of unique Asari comments, and maybe they unlock some rooms or something. But by and large, the content will be the same whether they've got an Asari or not. Because what this is it's not about the world. It's about the Asari. Going into the Asari arc with an Asari means that the Asari has a chance to get up on stage and act. And this is the critical thing to understand. Whenever you face a branching option in an open world game and you can't make it algorithmic and have to actually script something, that's not actually a branching path. That's an opportunity to act. You want one of the player character people to stand up and say something and be somebody. And for once, the Asari has a chance to be an Asari in a party of non-Asari and say whatever she wants to say about, how it is to be an Asari and what she thinks of humans and how grateful she is or isn't or whatever. She has a chance to be a character. Not only can she pull up Asari beats, but because she has the spotlight, you can pull in other personality beats as well, and they'll flow naturally because she can just continue to be in the spotlight. This kind of approach fundamentally assumes that the reason the player has built a party is because they want the party to interact and to grow. And it's a very powerful experience if you can do it. So we already do it mechanically. And this is something that is well understood. If you build a party of characters, let's say you're building a fantasy team. You got a warrior. Is your warrior defense-oriented or offense-oriented? Well, that depends. Do you have a secondary warrior like a cleric? If you've got a cleric, then the cleric can handle the defense and the warrior can handle the offense. But if you don't have a cleric and you're like a rogue mage, psionic or whatever, then you're going to have the warrior take the defense and then have the DPS with the other characters. That's a way that the party relates to each other. The fighter exists in a certain role because the rest of the party exists in their own way. And as you move through the game, the entire party grows into a finely honed machine where, everybody knows exactly what to do and they fit together perfectly. And then someone screws up and you laugh at it. And then, that's the nature of this kind of thing. You have this in a scripted game as well to some extent, but because you're not building the characters, it's very limited in terms of what you can actually do with your party machine. Normally you just pick 2 characters that aren't your party leader's class and call it a day, but you don't really get the kind of denseness out of that you can if you've built 3 PCs. It's not even a matter of the complexity of the characters. It's just a matter of the way that the player has assigned them, the way that the player has created them and understands how they're working together. That's just not available if the player isn't the one choosing what these characters are. It's the same thing with personalities. These characters fill roles within the party. What is the party dynamic you want? These characters fill those roles. Same way as with combat. So let me give you some examples. There's a recent game called Solasta. I think it's called Solasta. And it is in early access. It's pretty rough right now. But it does have a wildcard party mechanic. And it does most of these things reasonably well. I think it was on accident. But that doesn't change the fact that it's pretty good at this. What happens when you get into a conversation tree in Solasta? So you've got some guy with a really bad haircut telling you the story. You're going to be our mercenary team to go out to the forest area and see if anybody is still alive. What happens to your party? How do you have your conversation tree? Well, the answer is every single one of your party members has one conversation option. So instead of having a conversation tree, you have each of your characters having their own particular thing they want to say. Now in practice, this is just like a conversation tree, right? So you would write like, okay, well, we want to have a conversation tree. Let's give them the inquisitive option and the gruff option and the fun option. But you assign them to the inquisitive character, the gruff character, the fun character. This allows those characters to take a specific place within the party. Now, these personality traits can't be as defined as they would be in a game with scripted characters, because you don't know whether the gruff character is going to be a knight or a mage or a rogue. But you still know that there's always going to be a gruff character because you've written the game that way. The party will always have someone who is gruff. The party will always have someone who is the smartest person in the party. The party will always have someone who is the dumbest person in the party. We'll always have someone who is the smarmy one or the geeky one. These things come naturally to party dynamics, so you can put them in the party and the player will accept that one of their characters is taking the lead with a fairly generic personality. The more these characters are on screen, the more the PCs will be accepted by the player. They grow into these personalities that when the player makes a character, they're almost never making a character like down to the minutest detail of their personality. They just have a general sense of who they want the character to be. And that's going to work out very well for this sort of situation where you can mix and match smaller characteristics. In Solasta, for example, they do have the Doomsday Wheel. Neutral good, chaotic evil. It makes no sense anymore. Nobody uses it for anything. It's just a tabletop convention that should have been phased out of CRPGs ages ago. And in addition to that, they let you choose a variety of personality keywords for your character. And so it's like, okay, well, this person is, is greedy but also cautious, and this person is caring and believes in authority, and this person is just off the walls, but very very gives all their money away, and then they each have different kinds of ways of talking. That's enough. You don't need this weird wheel. If we know someone is greedy and cautious, we don't need to know that they are also chaotic and neutral or whatever. That's pointless. These will power all of the party's interactions with themselves. And of course, a lot of that is powering their interactions with the world, right? Because the whole point here is if one member of the party steps forward to say something to the world, then there's a reason that it was that party member. And you don't want it to just always be the one with the high charisma. You want to have it so that there's a meaning to that choice. This approach is substantially deeper than you might think. And this is something that is easier and easier the more you start to wrap your head around it. Let's say that you start near the library of Sturgeon, whatever, right? It's this cool library. It's got lots of books in it. And your party goes in there and they're poking around. Well, there's lots of nerds inside this library. What happens when your characters talk to the nerds? Well, if you have no nerd on your party, no one with scholarly interests, then nothing happens. You just like, oh, hey, guy, keep up the good book work, I guess. But if you've got a nerd on your party, what happens? This is a chance for the nerd to act. They're like, oh, hey, have you read that new, book by Sir Reginald? I had a copy back at my place, but here's the problem, though. That might give the player more information about whatever's going on, and you don't want the flow of information to be limited to the party members, because if the player's choices do that, then you're going to have to write branches. So what do? Well, the mage steps forward. I'll give them elf ears, and they're like, "Hey, brother, what you up to? Let's talk books." And this guy's like, "Yeah, let's talk books. I've got so much cool book stuff to say. Here's a book. See this book?" And then the other party members come by and are like, "Hey, dude, we don't have time for this shit. Come on," and pull him away. You've turned a branching point into an act. The party members are distinguishing themselves and having character beats instead of you having to write twice as much content and keeping track of whether the player knows something or not. And this continues throughout. These characters can be pretty self-focused. So even if you are traveling in the wilderness across a huge map full of woods, right, and there's nobody around for eons, with a linear game, that means that nobody is doing anything, because nobody is allowed to grow or change as a character or have any significant character beats as long as there's plot left unsolved, right? But in this case, the plot doesn't matter. So the four characters can just work within their group to create fun dynamics. Whether this is a running thing or not is unimportant. So for example, your rogue starts up a card game. Just a fun little beat as you're waltzing along. Oh, isn't that cute? Well, why not have that continue and be like the next day, the mage tries to get revenge for the rogue's card game by, using math, but then, the rogue cheats, and now you've got a little bit of a mini drama going on within your party, all powered by basic knowledge of who these characters are. Their species or origin, their class, their stats, and their personality keywords. These things allow you to script whatever beats you want to script within the party. Now, not every party is going to have every variety of thing. There might be parties that don't have any dunces. If the player decides to do like an all-mage party, then you're not going to get any dunce conversations because they don't have anyone with an int lower than 15. Or you might not ever have the rogue cheats everybody because they don't have any rogues. There are so many different options here. But what I like about all of this is how it can work regardless of what's going on in the world. This is a party whose existence is focused on their personal journey. And that means that they can have these beats while they're running through the forest, while they're fighting demons, while they're solving problems in a town, while they're doing major plot stuff. They could do major plot stuff and it would matter precisely the same amount in terms of how their characters are evolving. There's a million ways to implement this, and you can get as complicated as you want. For example, you could have like a running thing where the thieves' evolving card game silliness eventually starts to take effects in town, and then the party is suddenly faced with an encounter of 24 thugs who accuse the thief of cheating and that sort of jazz. You can do all that sort of stuff. It's not critical, though. The most critical thing you do is give these characters a chance to take the stage and act. They need to be able to be themselves. If they don't show up on the screen, then they don't exist. It's the same with combat, right? If you make a character and they never show up in combat, then they don't exist. Like, oh, you made a mage and then they never fire a single spell? Why did you make a mage? Same idea here. Every character needs to be able to take the front, take the spotlight, and act. And the more they overact, the better. If you want to see an idea of how to do this, feel free to play Solasta. It's pretty rough, and it'll probably be pretty rough forever. But these ideas are very clearly laid out, and you can see them working quite well. Other wildcard party games often forget to add in any sort of party dynamic other than the mechanical kind, the combat kind. And that leaves you with a party that doesn't feel like characters. It just feels like a giant pile of stats. To be honest, I much prefer it when they feel like a giant pile of personalities and I lose track of their stats. Either way, let me know what you think and have a good one.